Hello, my name is Emmanuel Daniel. I'm on the Cultural Management Podcast with Chris Smith.
Emmanuel or Emmanuel. How do I pronounce this correctly? Good morning.
It depends on which cultural tradition you come from.
Well, exactly.
My cultural tradition is colonial British heritage, right? So we'll go with the Anglo-Saxon feel to that. Emmanuel Daniel.
Emmanuel Daniel. Okay, it sounds it's no, it's a sort of it sort of links together. Emmanuel, thank you for being here. I'd love to have you on the show. Culture Matters podcast on international business. That's what you're listening to. We're recording this, and I'm mentioning this because I have a question prepared for you. We're recording this April 14, 2025. This is for you who are listening in the future, right after this recording. We had a bit of a pre-talk here, and I mean, if you want to see how Emmanuel look, go to YouTube because there's the recording as well. You can't hear in his voice. However, there is a mix in your voice, as it sounds somewhat Indian, but also Malaysian, something Singaporean, something. Elaborate a bit on that. Tell us a little bit who you are, where you are, and what is your cultural frame of reference, please?
I was born in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia,
That was
which is
good.
an incredibly multicultural melting pot of different cultures.
Uh-huh.
From a geopolitical perspective, Southeast Asia, which is where Malaysia, Singapore is where Chinese, Indian, Arabic, Western cultures meet. And I have had, as part of my neighbors, Chinese, Malay, Indian. The pastor in my church was American, so I grew up with familiarity and a comfort with cosmopolitan culture. And then I moved to Singapore, which sometimes people think is a planet all on its own, but actually it's like a twin or a sibling of Malaysia, in that we used to be one country, and then my entire adulthood has been in Singapore. And I have a very interesting story. Whenever I say to people I'm from Singapore, the question invariably I get asked, like, by taxi drivers in Beijing and people who don't know enough, where are you from originally?
Yeah.
And I get offended with this question because, I'm from Singapore. And why is it that when someone who doesn't look Chinese is asked, where are you from originally, the next question, that you don't trust that that you have an idea of what Singapore is, and you think it's all Chinese. Singapore is a multicultural melting pot of Chinese, Indian, Malay. We are all equal. We built the country together, and so on. And then sometimes, in order to keep the conversation going, I'll just slot in and I say I was born in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And invariably, I'll get the reply, "Oh, that makes sense." And the funny thing is, both Singapore and Malaysia are of the same composition of people. It's just that Singapore is 95%, or sorry, 75% Chinese, and Malaysia is 50% Malay. And so there's a kind of a feel that Malaysia is not a Chinese country in that way, but about 30% of the population is Chinese. It's just the different percentages in the composition of the people. And in both countries, I'm just 10%. The Indian native Indian population, or the Indian population that was born and bred in these countries, are only 10%. So I'm a minority in both countries.
Right.
20 years ago, when I first went to Ireland, there was a kind of a respect that if you're from Southeast Asia, you're more likely to be, coming to Ireland to study medicine. So at an Irish pub, I'll get asked, "Are you with the College of Surgeons?" That kind of thing. And of course, I wasn't a doctor, but it's very nice to be asked that. And then 10 years later, when I go back to Ireland, I get my passport checked and asked many questions because there's a whole wave of IT workers from India,
Oh
trying
yeah.
to find jobs in Ireland. And so now I've been put into the pot of the Indian diaspora out there. And yet, culturally, I have to make a distinction between who I am, which is someone who's from Southeast Asia, who has a much more, multi-dimensional idea of being part of a cosmopolitan society than someone who just comes out of India
Mm.
recently. So I need to distinguish myself from that. Ethnically, I'm Indian, but socially and spiritually and intellectually,
And
I'm
culturally,
far
I guess.
from,
Yeah.
and culturally, I'm probably closer to Chinese people because I have Chinese people in my family. I spend a lot of time in China and stuff like that. And yet, that's not the first thing that anyone interacting with me might think about.
Mm. Yeah, it's a good story. It's interesting because indeed, I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, and if you want to see how Emmanuel looks, for me, you come across indeed as in ethnically Indian, right? And which
Yes.
and this happens, but it's also in on the what is it, the east coast of Africa. There are many Indians
Oh, yeah.
as
So I'm
well,
in
right?
Johannesburg. I'm in Johannesburg, and I invariably get asked, "Are you from Durban?"
Ah, yeah, for instance, yes, indeed.
The South Africans, absolutely. Like, if I met a South African, that's almost the first question they'll ask me. Yeah.
Can you do the Indian head shake, or is that's not
Ah, no, no. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
oh, the wobbly head is
That's
exactly this.
yeah, that's not native to me, but
I
I
know,
enjoy it. I
I
enjoy it
know.
whenever every time I see it. Yes.
I have a question for you because we're talking about business and I'd like to talk more about your business as well. And thank you very much for the introduction. You're currently in Beijing, right? That's
That's
you
correct. Yes.
in Beijing. Okay. Um, in your bio, it says, and I'm reading this, I'm quoting you, is you're the, it says, I'm the founder of a
Oh, okay.
business. That's what it says. I mean, that's what I have, that's what I received from you. What business and why this business? Why this business that you are in right now?
So I'm the founder of The Asian Banker, which today is called Tab Global because we are, not just Asian anymore. We are into Africa and a lot of the developing world.
Yeah.
And The Asian Banker is a publishing and research company in the banking industry. And I started it as a very simple publication 28 years ago. But as we grew, I recreated a lot of the disciplines that I'd learned before I started this business in consulting, in research, and so on. And we also run trainings for bankers around the world. I just came in from London, where we had a global bank leadership program. So I'm all over the place in that regard. I trained to be a lawyer, and I'm actually, I'm associated with the with Lincoln's Inn in the UK.
Mhm.
And on as soon as I qualified with my law degree, I decided that that's not what I wanted to be. And I spent 10 years, in the wilderness, so to speak, in consulting,
Right.
in a variety of other consulting type professions, actually, trying to find my calling. And then I realized that the common theme in my jobs and my employment and even in my training was writing. And so I realized that I'd like to do something that is a little bit journalistic. And the banking industry presented itself because at that time you wouldn't start a publication in government or some other industries.
Mhm.
And banking was attractive to me because I call it a cradle to grave industry. All
Uh-huh.
of us have something to do with banking from the time we're born to the time we die.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
also call it a cathedral industry in that regardless of which country you go to, the banking industry is a respectable, it's an institution in that country. When you meet bankers, you meet some of the most important people in that country, and so all these attracted me. and my love for traveling. And so by starting something called the Asian Banker,
Hmm.
from Singapore, I had to travel to Malaysia, to Thailand, to Hong Kong, to
Hmm.
Korea, to Japan, and make friends with very senior bankers in all of these countries, and then build a brand name. And then now we are in Dubai and growing into Nigeria and South Africa and Ghana and so on. So it's just basically I'm what you call a free spirit who has built a business around the things that I like and which has now become highly institutionalized.
Is it what's the I mean globally, right? I mean, I'm a Dutchman, right? I was born in Amsterdam. I'm calling you from Paris, so I have a bit of an international experience. The attitude towards banks, they earn billions of, but not even millions, but billions of dollars. Isn't the attitude towards banks internationally negative?
Oh, yeah, but every mother and his her child wants someone in the family to work in a bank. When you have a family member that who works in a bank, you think it's a matter of prestige, except that none of us like the idea of a bank screwing us up on fees and on
Yeah.
rates and stuff like that, right? So it's an industry that is essentially extractive, and it's an industry that insists on having its intermediary role between a man and his money. And it's an industry that's increasingly being disintermediated by technology today. So it's an industry that is in a constant renovation mode, and that's those are the themes that I pick up on and make into an issue.
Hmm.
The thing is that banking makes someone like me think very deeply about the human desire for intermediation. Whether you're a trader,
Explain in intermediation. What's that for you in your business, in your neck of the woods?
in in every industry, someone needs to stand in between, in the middle of a transaction between a buyer and a seller.
Hmm.
So somebody who wants to borrow money, a bank takes money from someone who needs to deposit money,
Right.
and then lends it on. Somebody who wants to make a payment, the bank insists on being in the middle of that transaction, and makes that payment possible. Somebody who wants an investor, a bank helps, that person go and look for an investor.
Hmm.
The thing is that technically, many things in society today don't need intermediators,
Don't
because
need the bank, in other words.
they don't need the bank.
Yeah.
And it also, when you think about the internet, and the fact that we have Facebook and Google and all of the large corporations,
Yeah.
which onboards millions of users and then looks for ways to monetize those
Hmm.
relationships.
Hmm.
Those platform players are also intermediators. And the way the internet is set up, we technically do not need intermediators in that you and I can reach out to each other
Oh yeah.
directly,
Yeah.
and we can also be able to do transactions and so on. But for a variety of reasons, one of which is to build the technology on which these transactions are made,
Hmm.
and the other is because of legislation and the need for some activities to be licensed so
Hmm.
that we guard against fraudulent transactions and bad actors out in the internet and so on. The role of intermediators get rehashed again and again and again. And so humanity is in a journey of trying to re-establish the role of intermediators, that they're not extractive, that they function to facilitate a process and nothing more, and that individuals are able to reach out to each other in the way that they want to and maintain their own data, their own integrity, their own
Hmm.
communities
Hmm.
that they want to build. So I mean that's a high level view of the intermediation business, and banking is right in the middle of it. It deals with money, which is the essence of a lot of everything that we do in life.
Yeah.
So the thing that I think about, like if you take cryptocurrencies, for example,
Hmm.
you and I can transact a Bitcoin transaction with each other directly.
Hmm.
So crypto has brought that technology into being, which is that we do now no longer need an intermediator. And yet, even in the crypto industry, you'd find platforms like Coinbase and Kraken and so on, who insist on providing that intermediary function. And a
Yeah.
lot of cryptos themselves, if take Cardano or Tezos, they are run by venture capitalists who fund the technology development that takes place in the crypto and makes themselves the intermediator in a crypto, right? So even as humanity is finding new ways to interact with each other, um, society is organized in such a way that we regenerate the role of intermediators on and on and on and on again. So I'm just fascinated by how, despite technology, that we still find a need for institutionalizing the
Mhm.
intermediation
Yeah.
process.
How is that? I mean, you do business in different countries in the world, right? Asia, Dubai, you mentioned. You got something in London as well, even the continent of Europe. How do
Yeah.
different countries deal with this? I mean, I would reckon that, say, Malaysia, where you are, is ahead of the game, where France, for instance, is running behind, is more traditional, more conservative. Is there any truth in that?
What has happened in banking is that uh, from about the 1950s, the American banks learned to use mainframe computers, large computers with incredible processing powers to process transactions of their customers. They
Hmm.
perfected that model, they scaled that model, they exported the model to the rest of the world. And on the back of that, mainframe technology, they built everything else, their ability to process payments and so on. And the technology operated really very well. But over time, technology evolved. Eventually, it was possible to do all these transactions with smaller computers. They call them, like AS400s, which are, middle layer technology and so on,
Hmm.
and right down to the laptop, which you and I have. We can essentially run businesses on the back of a laptop.
Yeah.
So you've seen technology evolve so dramatically. And then what happens is that the institutions in the US, which are mainframe centric, found it very difficult to make that transition because they had what is called a legacy
Right.
technology at the back of them. And then we find that it was the countries at the end of the forest, the countries that didn't have access to the original mainframe technologies
Hmm.
that were absorbing and becoming native to the new technologies that were
Hmm.
being introduced. So when we think about mobile phone technology, for example, it's mostly the East Asian countries, everything from Japan to Australia, who are leading the way. We are
They're skipping
native
the
to
landline concept, right? Everything
we
goes
skipped the
mobile.
landline. We skipped the landline concept. We didn't need tellers telling us what to do,
Right.
and as our institutions didn't have that legacy technology around, they were able to imbibe the new
Mm.
technologies as they evolved. And today you see that in Africa, in the areas of payment. Payment essentially is a messaging or a message between two parties.
Hmm.
And if you and I can transact a message on a phone for free, there's no reason why we can't send money to each other for
Yeah,
free.
absolutely.
And it's in Africa that the African telco players have discovered this, and now you have players like M-Pesa, Flutterwave, a whole range of African players emerging who are able to deliver the latest in technology in the simplest form and revolutionize financial services that didn't exist in their part of the world before. And when some of these Africans travel to the US to do, to attend conferences or to study or to live, they're totally shocked that to do
Oh
a
yeah.
simple payment, you need to use a checkbook and it takes
A
three
check, a
days to
paper
clear
check, which could
a
bounce
paper
and
check.
stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're just flabbergasted that. hey, this is supposed to be the most developed country in the world, and yet I can't just send money to the guy next to me in an instant, which I can do in Africa.
Yeah.
So that's the scenario that we've come to in the world, and it's a given that in technology, and especially banking, which is a big user of technology, it's the legacy players that make it find it difficult to make that transition.
All right.
But having said that, sometimes the legacy players would not make the transition for the longest time, and then there comes an inflection point, and they make a huge decision to make a quantum leap into an even more forward-looking technology, and then they become game changers as we go
Right.
along.
Yeah.
And so, like today, for example, there is a technology called stable coins, which essentially is a crypto, but it essentially carries the value of a currency. And the currency that's most carried on stable coins today is the US dollar. And the US is on the verge of introducing legislation that will enable all of its banks to issue stable coins.
Hmm.
And then suddenly you will see that the US, having been such a
A
laggard
laggard in
in
for
terms,
years. Yeah.
and then suddenly making a transition that the rest of the world will have to follow.
Yeah.
So, so nothing changes until it does. And that's how the U.S. keeps its leadership on, despite looking
Right.
disheveled and
Or dated like that. Yeah.
and dated and so on.
Yeah.
So we don't underestimate what happens in I mean, that's exactly what happened on the mobile phone technology front, right? Because all of the other countries had GSM, and Japan had its Docomo,
Hmm.
Europe had its Nokia and so on, until someone in the US figured out that the best way is to put all of these technologies together in a smartphone, and the iPhone was born in 2007,
Yeah.
and that set the tone for the next phase of evolution. So it's a kind of jumping over each other
Yeah. Makes sense what you're saying. Yeah.
and in banking, yes, if I want to see what the future of banking looks like, and I want to see how banking has imbibed technology today, especially in the areas of payment, I would come to China, where I don't carry a wallet anymore. Or I'd go
Mm.
to India, where the regulator has given every citizen an identity on the back of which you can make payments instantly on a QR code. And you would never have imagined that such a development would have been possible
Yeah.
in a place like India. So it's the developing countries that move further down the road quickly,
Mhm.
but sometimes I would say it's the developed countries that make the inflection point decisions, and that comes maybe in 20-year milestones, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. I have another question again, and I took that from your LinkedIn profile. It says you mentioned that diversity, and I'm reading again, diversity is important for growth. How do you how do you know and how do you measure that?
Diversity is fun, uh, and it's important for growth in that we are unable to scale beyond our own biases unless we are able to absorb ideas and opportunities that comes out of our comfort zone. So diversity is all about getting out of our comfort zone and getting comfortable in existing in an environment where we are not the incumbent and we're not the definitive player.
Hmm.
Right now, I'm scaling my business out into Africa and back into the UK, by the way. I'm
Hmm.
just writing a proposal for a huge forum in the UK.
Hmm.
And these are initiatives that require me to understand people who are different from me. So,
Okay. Yeah.
so diversity is an important element for scaling.
Is there anything, I mean, that's why I mentioned the date in when we're recording this, April 14, 2025. what's going on in, I mean, are we doomed? Let's put it like this, with all the tariff wars going on. Is this, because this all has to do with finance and money, of course.
Are we doomed with the tariff wars?
I mean, it's a bit of a stretch, I understand, but this, where is this going, really?
I think we humanity is in an inflection point in that post World War II, the Americans inadvertently, not necessarily consciously, inadvertently created a global system, a global trading system
Hmm.
that was based on the rule of law, transparency, and security. And America provided the security for the rest of the world.
Hmm.
And America did that out of its own self-interest because it learned during World War II that weapons manufacturing contributed to GDP growth. In the middle of World War II, America was the only growing country in GDP terms, and it grew very well. I think it was like
Right.
8% per annum. Um, and then in providing security to the rest of the world, America was a net exporter to the rest of the world of manufactured goods in that
Hmm.
period of time. But over time, that manufacturing capability morphed into being an exporter of services. And in the 80s, I still remember the United States would go to every country in Asia and demand that every country open their financial services industry because they had something to export to these countries. And that
Mm.
was Citibank and JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America. We want you to let our banks into your countries. And by that time, America had actually started declining in becoming a net exporter of hard goods to the
Hmm.
rest of the world and became a net importer. And that was driven by American corporations that needed to manage their costs.
Hmm.
And so they exported their costs by doing their manufacturing in cheaper parts of the world.
Hmm.
And America was the net importer, and we was in a trade deficit with just about many countries in the world, which eventually became wealthy on the back of being able to export to the US.
Hmm.
So we actually are all beneficiaries of a system where many countries in the world are wealthy today because they were able to export to the US, and the US was able to afford the things that they bought because they were running a heavy deficit budget, a deficit economy that kept spending more than it was able to generate income. And I guess it's come to an inflection point where you have a president who's trying to tackle that trend and try and put a stop to it and find something that is equitable to the US.
Mm.
Um, and to be honest, I don't begrudge him that because I write in my book that in 1985, it was people like Jack Welch and Citibank, John Reed, who exported the manufacturing capability to India, to China, and made them what they are today.
Hmm.
And wages have remained stagnant in the US since 1985.
Mm.
And that's an incredible phenomenon that no other country would tolerate for themselves. Wages have stagnated in Japan in the last 30 years, and it has resulted in, Japan's economy going into a slide. So now we are in an inflection point. The rhetoric and the narrative is troublesome because it is couched in phrases which are nationalistic and all that.
Mm.
But the underlying problem that the US is trying to deal with, and all other countries have to figure out their own journey in this process. That is, do we continue selling to the US? Is there something that we can sell each other?
Mm.
And if the US is not going to provide the world order in terms of the Bretton Woods institutions like World Bank, IMF, the UN, and so on,
Hmm.
what are the other institutions which we have access to that we can help, that can help build, bilateral trade relations that we can, sort of make each other wealthy again. Today, there are a number of multilateral trade agreements that do not involve the US. So in Asia, for example, all of the countries, most of the countries in East Asia used to be members of something called APEC, of which the US, Canada, Peru were also members of
Asia
the Asia
Pacific. Yeah.
Pacific
Yeah.
Economic Corporation, and then now they've formed another community which excludes the U.S. And that actually that community really has China as the dominant economy,
Mhm.
except that China, unlike the U.S., is enjoys a trade surplus with just about every other country in the world, and not a trade deficit, right? So, in other words, U.S. used to make other countries wealthy, and China makes other countries spend money, and it actually empties out the manufacturing capabilities in all of the different countries that it does business in. So even China has to rethink its own journey in the value chain, in the trade value chain. And so it is becoming interesting that many of the countries that China does business with would like to see some of the manufacturing come back to their countries. And China itself is becoming an expensive country to run a number of industries, and a number of Chinese investors are now going around and looking for cheaper places to do manufacturing. So
I have another question for you, if I may, right? You wrote a book, this is my question. You wrote a book, The Great Transition, right? Tell us a little bit more about that, please.
the great transition is about the financial services industry moving from its legacy architecture
Mhm.
to something into the future where it's losing its intermediation role, so intermediary role, and the industry as an institution has to rethink what it means to the end user. If end users are able to do more of their transactions on their own,
Hmm.
and also get the information to do more of the transactions. During the COVID period, you noticed there were several inflections in the banking industry where um, communities of investors, retail investors, talking to each other on Reddit, were able to you know, push back on institutional investors. There was an episode in the US called the GameStop stock exchange stock episode where the institutional investors were trying to short a stock, and instead the retail investors came in and scuppered that. And so you have a ecosystem now where the retail end user is getting a lot more power and a lot more ownership of their transactions, whether
Hmm.
it's payments, whether it's investments, and even simple things like borrowing, lending, investing in each other, and so on. So the whole banking infrastructure is now under scrutiny, under self-reflection as to what should the intermediation business look like going forward. And so the book was written mostly for people in the banking industry,
Hmm.
but I tried to keep it simple. And so the cover of the book has a picture of a block of ice. And to make it very simple for lay people who are not in banking to understand what this book is about, I'm saying to them that there was a time when the ice trade was something about sawing ice out of the frozen lakes up
Hmm.
in Maine or up in Sweden and so on, and then actually carrying ice on horse-drawn carriages to the city for it to be consumed. And what is ice today? Ice is something that you and I generate out of the refrigerator. We are in control of it. We are control of when we have it, how much, and how, and for what we use it for. And so finance is becoming that, in that it is not an industry that is being dominated by wholesalers who have to spend thousands of dollars moving money around the
Hmm.
world. and the money in your pocket would have swirled around the world twice, subject to inflation, bank charges, exchange rates, security considerations, and
Right.
so on,
Yeah.
before it gets to you. So that's why the financial services industry is huge today, because it's inefficient. And as it becomes increasingly efficient, the people in that industry need to rethink the role of the traditional bank. So that was what my book was about in essence. But there are a number of technicalities in there, and also there's a big picture element in there. That is, how does change come about in society?
Mm.
And very interestingly, when we see how the financial services industry changed over time, it is never because of design. It's because of economies, and especially the US economy, responding to new challenges. And then, there's an inflection point where it goes on to the next level. And so we are now at a phase in the financial economy where that maybe because of the trade wars that are taking place right now, the trade barriers that the US is putting in place,
Mm.
that we will see a very different ecosystem evolving. And the US doesn't do any of this out of intention or a grand design. It does it because it is moving from one layer of frustration to the next.
Mm. Okay. Interesting points. Excuse me. Interesting points, interesting conversation. Given all that you talked about or that you've told us, what could be your three tips to become more culturally competent? Given your, say, your personal experience or your business experience.
Wow, that you've caught me on that because I want to give you a more thoughtful answer. Three tips of becoming culturally more competent or culturally more sensitive.
Well, I think if you're more culturally sensitive, you will also become more culturally competent in the end, right?
It depends. I think that, culturally insensitive people sometimes can actually be a lot more clearer and simpler than culturally sensitive people. I guess the first thing I'll say to you is, what is the outcome that you want to achieve out of being culturally sensitive?
Mm-hmm.
So you work out with the outcome and then you work backwards. So if the outcome is you want to be a friend of the world, that's not difficult. You just need to, reach out and stuff like that. Um, I think that the first thing is that you need to think about the outcome. The second thing is we need to be mindful of how we project ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in my case, for example, because I'm dark skinned, I always wear light clothes.
Okay.
Um, and I found in my personal experience, and maybe it's different for different people, that when I wear light clothes, people are nicer to me.
Really?
And that, yeah, it's been my personal experience. Okay, so
Okay.
I invariably never wear dark clothes, especially when I'm traveling and I'm at the airport. I'm checking in for flights. I'm sitting in a plane. I'm checking in at the hotel. All of these are instances where I'm interacting with someone who's different
Uh-huh.
from me, and someone who has no idea the cultural context that I come from. So I make it easy for that person by dressing in a way that is not, that does not rake up the defensive aspect of that person, or whatever it is that that person has at the back of their mind. It makes it easier for that person to interact with me. So the outcome that I get out of that is I get more pleasant interactions all
Mm-hmm.
through. So the first thing is, think about the outcomes. What is it? You may be a racist, but in order to exist in a culturally, cosmopolitan world that we live in, invariably we are always relating to someone who's different from us. What is the outcome there? If the outcome is you want peace and you want, things to go your way, then you need to project yourself in a certain way.
Yeah.
And we're always projecting ourselves, even when we think we're not projecting ourselves. So, when we want to be sour and we want to be insular and so on, then we start seeing that people who are different from us will treat us negatively, and that reinforces our insularity. So, you got what you wanted,
Yeah.
and you reinforced all the biases that you exist in your head. So, think of outcomes, think of how you're projecting yourself, and relate that back to the outcomes that you want. Um, and thirdly, really, uh, all of us need to have a religion as to what we think humanity is at the end of the day. And whatever it is, if whether you believe in a God or you believe that all of us are energy out in space,
Hmm.
uh, that we share that little planet. So whether we like it or not, we have something to do with each other. And on the back of that, you create your own narrative. So, be mindful of of the outcomes that you intend. Be mindful of of how you're projecting yourself, because it
Hmm.
projects back on you, and it colors all your relationships that you have. And think about the end game. And I think that those are the three thoughts that I have for existing in a
Great tips.
multicultural world.
Great tips and very creative as well to that extent. Emmanuel, if people want to get in touch with you or if they want to find your book, where should we send them to? Where can they find you?
Chris, this conversation has triggered in me some thoughts that I want to put on my blog.
Uh-huh.
So the best reference point is really my blog, emmanueldaniel.com. On the blog, you will see sections of the blog which has to do with finance, but sections of the blog which has to do with geopolitics, and sections of the blog which has to do with my travel. So some of the things that we talked about will go into one of those sections.
Cool.
And you've just asked some questions that has triggered some thinking in me right now. So
Okay.
emmanueldaniel.com.
EmmanuelDaniel.com. That'll be in the show notes for sure. And I'm pretty sure we'll bump into each other in the future. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Chris.